Persona 3 Reload is on the horizon, and alongside it comes many lofty expectations and ambitions. It is one of the most anticipated games of the year for me, and today I want to talk about the concept of Persona 3 Reload. Is it necessary? Could it even be additive? I want to talk about the controversy surrounding the game, and my overall thoughts on the game before it actually comes out soon. So let's sit back, relax, get a nice bit of a liquid H2O, yeah, get your hydration, get those conditions up to great, and let's talk about a game that is going, or at least a series that has become near and dear to me, Persona 3 Reload, and Persona on the whole. Now, Persona 3 Reload is in a bit of an interesting state, because there's three main Persona games that are kind of in the zeitgeist of the public eye. Well, they're kind of the more popular games. Persona 3, 4, and 5, where the series really changed up its formula from those Shin Megami Tensei roots and started to trend in a wildly different direction, incorporating the social simulator aspects of the game, intertwined with the dungeon crawling goodness we all have come to know and love. Now, Persona 4 and 5 are in a bit of an interesting space in comparison to P3, because 4 and 5 have what many would consider to be a definitive edition. For P4, it's called Golden, and for P5, it's called Royal. These are kind of like the catch-all versions of these games that are the biggest, baddest versions of themselves, with additional story, maybe even characters or party members, and just overall the version that people point to and say, you should play this version if you're going to play P4 or 5. Now, 3 doesn't really have that right now. It very well may with Reload, but what's the problem with 3? Why doesn't it really have it? See, there's kind of two main versions of P3. Technically, you have the original, but no one talks about that one. You have Fez, and you have Portable. I think Fez is the closest version to a definitive edition that P3 has right now until Reload, but it has some glaring weaknesses and things that are just aged relatively poorly depending upon who you ask. See, in Fez, you don't control your party members in combat. They're controlled by AI, but you can kind of select the behavior or the priority list that you want those characters to perform actions against. So you can say, Yukari, I want you to primarily heal, and then Yukari will decide, okay, I will decide how to do that, you won't decide the exact action I will take, etc., etc. Fez also has the tired mechanic. If you're in Tartarus, your party members can become tired, and once they become tired, if given the opportunity, they'll just leave you, forcing you to either use less characters to combat the higher mobs in Tartarus, or you get to go back down to the entrance and get some new jabronis who are still rested and ready to go. And funnily enough, this would reward and kind of incentivize you to level up all of your party members at the same time, and to just keep going until they all are tired and all leave, and that is your cue to exit Tartarus for that night. But Portable, the version that came out on, guess it, a portable system, the PSP, doesn't have that. Instead of having cutscenes and cinematics like Fez does, it elects to go for a more visual novel style and approach, only utilizing PNGs or JPEGs for characters and background imagery, and replacing the actual cutscenes of P3 with, well, visual novel style dialogue. And the major difference in the gameplay comes in the form of Tartarus, where you have direct control of your party members, like in P4 and P5, as an option if you want to go that route, and your party members, they may get tired, but they're not going to abandon you in Tartarus, which makes it so you can bang out pretty much all of Tartarus that you have to do in a single night if you're decent enough at collecting money and healing up and everything. Which, funnily enough, de-incentivizes the use of alternate party members. Because why would I level up someone 20 levels below me when I can just level up the party I've been using that are all caught up and ready to go? There's other differences in the versions as well, and this is really where a lot of the, well, is it a definitive edition comes into play here, because in Portable, you have an alternate primary main character. See, the main character of P3 generally is viewed to be Makoto, your gloomy emo boy who clearly listens to My Chemical Romance more than on occasion. But you also have FemC, who alongside playing as a girl, you also have different social links. So it provides a different experience to Makoto in a lot of ways because of that. Alternate storylines are available to you because of the social link mechanic. And a lot of people really cherish that idea because, well, some people just want to play as a girl, and that's entirely fine. And P3 is, funnily enough, the one game in the series that lets you do that, at least in 3, 4, and 5. And some people may just prefer the social links available to FemC. And that's an experience that Fez just simply does not have. But in lieu of that, what Fez brings to the table is something called The Answer. It is an epilogue to the story of P3, where instead of playing as Makoto or FemC, you play as Aigis, and you find out what happens after the events of P3. Personally, I'm not that big of a fan of The Answer. I'm not gonna be like, oh, you're wrong for liking it or something, it's just personal preference. The gameplay never really piqued my interest for The Answer, and the story, while being kind of intriguing, makes me want a follow-up to it that we don't really get outside of P4 Arena. And if the story is followed up, maybe my perception or opinion of The Answer will change. But as of right now, it's just kind of bleh to me. And I prefer Makoto as an MC compared to FemC, so FemC not being included in P3 Reload, not really bothering me all that much. And actually, that kind of doubles back to a previous point, the controversy surrounding P3 Reload. See, if you don't know about P3 Reload, and I say, think of a definitive edition of P3, what would you have in it? Likely everyone would say, well, it would have both FemC and The Answer, because those are core components of both versions of P3, or both main versions, and neither of them are present in Reload. And I've said this for a while now, it is Atlas. Does anyone expect this not to have, like, a definitive edition, or, like, a royal or golden version of Reload down the line, just so they have another example or reason to sell you $60 or $70 games? Does anyone actually think this? Like, the biggest counter I can think of are people saying that it might be DLC down the line, and sure, maybe, but it's like one or the other, right? Like, no one actually thinks they're not going to try and monetize this down the line. It is Atlas, after all. They are the ones where if you want 60 FPS on your copy of P5 Royal on the PS4, you have to buy the PS5 version. You can't just buy an update to your PS4 version, like a lot of other games do. Or even give you a free version of the PS5 version. No. If you just want 60 FPS, you have to buy the game again, and get a few packs of DLC you probably don't care about all that much. And while that will definitely be a kick in the penis down the line, and I agree, and I'll call it out when it happens, I guess technically if it happens, but I mean, come on. Right now, when I'm looking at P3 Reload, it is addressing a lot of my critiques or issues that I had with P3. And in a lot of ways, P3 Reload, as of right now, is looking like the version of P3 that I wish we always had. Tartarus looks more interesting visually and gameplay-wise. The members of Seas seem to have additional storylines introduced way earlier into the experience to really, like, round out those pacing issues that I had with the first half of the game, because I feel like the story and Seas as a whole don't really pick up and become extremely interesting until summer, where you get Aigis. Because up to that point, you're largely just taking down various shadows, or doing social links with a bunch of jabronis just out in the regular world. Whereas in the other games, you can at least pursue social links / confidants with the main cast of characters. And it seems like in Reload, we'll at least have more events and new storylines involving those members of Seas introduced to us earlier on to hopefully round out that experience. So there's many reasons that I'm looking forward to P3 Reload in a lot of ways. And I think I'm also in a unique position where I just simply don't particularly care that much about The Answer unless they want to eventually follow up that storyline outside of P4 Arena. And if they do, 2 thumbs up for me. And I don't particularly care about FemC, so it doesn't necessarily bother me that much, but I'm also an advocate for the idea that you shouldn't be afraid to call something out simply because it may not affect you as much as other people. I think not having The Answer and not having FemC is a critique worthy to raise and worthy to point out. It's completely valid critique in my opinion. And I think this is where a lot of internet discourse kind of just collapses in a lot of ways because people just lack the idea of nuance. I am excited for Reload. It will arguably be one of my favorite games of this year if it holds up to my expectations, which are more realistic going off of all the footage and trailers we have seen so far. I am looking forward to the game. I will almost certainly enjoy the game and enjoy it a lot. Having said that, that doesn't mean that I can't critique elements of it that I think should be there, and that I think aren't there simply out of greed. I think there's a genuine point to raise in saying, can this be considered a definitive edition or definitive version of P3 without all the aspects of P3, FemC, and The Answer? And I can completely understand why people say it isn't, right? I can also say, if there was a version of P3 closest to being called a definitive edition, I think Reload is closest to that. It's a modernization in a lot of ways of a game that is severely aged. I don't think Persona has solely changed for the better since P3, but there's a lot of elements of the Persona formula that I think have been streamlined or just changed for the best from P3 to P4 and P4 to P5, including pacing, character development, gameplay, dungeon design, etc., etc. And you can see a lot of these changes just going from Tartarus, playing the original in like Portable or Fez, playing Tartarus and then going to play Mementos in P5 Royal. It's a similar concept, but done wildly differently. And there's some elements to Mementos that I'm glad to see are being brought over to Tartarus and P3 Reload. Persona is a series that is continually evolving, changing, morphing itself and trying to become better than it was, in a lot of ways. And this is a point that is brought up a little bit every now and then when it comes to remakes or remasters of old games. The more important idea is not necessarily to bring back the exact mechanics of what was before, but to bring back the feel that those mechanics instilled in the player all those years ago. We have more technology, more capabilities at our disposal, and game developers have at their disposal now than ever. Could you bring up a point that Tartarus was more interesting in Fez than in Portable because the game itself and the flow of the game was designed around the idea you're probably not going to beat it all in one night, because your characters get tired, and over the course of your runs in Tartarus, you're probably going to use everyone at your disposal, keeping them all relatively similarly leveled, if that is a playstyle you want, because they'll get tired and you just cycle them in and out. And that's why I seemingly have so much downtime in P3 Portable at night, where I'm just going to sleep early because there's not much to do. I've done my 2 social links at night, and I've already finished up Tartarus for that full moon session. Yeah, I think it's clear the pacing of the game on the whole was designed for Fez. And when you streamline or remove those elements of Fez, you can detect the pacing issues in Portable, in terms of scheduling. You can view that as a critique or as a positive, depending upon what your preference is, but I think you can easily see how this game was designed first and foremost for the Fez philosophy, and how it kind of falls through in Portable. And I'm really curious to see how they're going to handle this in Reload, because Tartarus has a unique feel and design to it than the other dungeons in Persona, especially 4 and 5. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, to have some kind of unique identifying aspect to it that sets it apart from the rest of the crowd. I think P3 is an amazing game in of itself, but it also has an amazing feel and theme to it that is tied up and oozes out of every pore and orifice that this game has, both gameplay and story-wise. The game is not afraid to remind you that it is about death, and coping with death and learning to live with death. It is a dark and macabre game on the whole, intermittently broken up with bouts of levity and fun. But it always reminds you that death is never that far away, and that's kind of the charm of P3. And that rings especially true for Tartarus. Tartarus is a difficult place. It's an unforgiving place, by design and implementation. Your party members are supposed to get tired as you scale its length, because it's simply too tall of a task for you to take on in any one night. It is something you have to slowly chip away at, get better, and continue to delve into even more difficult bastions and sectors of it. One mistake, one slip-up, one little moment where you lose concentration, and you can be ambushed by the Reaper or really difficult mobs and be punished for it. It is supposed to have that overwhelming feeling to it, because it's trying to instill this idea that death is always around the corner. Memento Mori is a saying that is in the title screen. Not the title screen, but, you know, the opening movie, you know. Memento Mori. Death is always near. You can run from it, you can hide from it, but as P3 reminds you time and time again, both gameplay and story-wise, you can never outrun death. You may for a time, but it will eventually catch up to you. All roads lead to the Reaper. And I think finding a way to preserve that idea gameplay-wise and story-wise, while not necessarily be beholden to older gameplay mechanics that may be kind of outdated nowadays, is important. You want to capture the feel of P3 and what made P3 so special, and not necessarily all the annoying stuff that makes the game age a little bit worse, in my opinion, than P4, P5. I think if there's a way to incentivize the use of multiple different party members, and not just stick with one team in Tartarus, or make it so that you can't just scale all of Tartarus in any one night of a full moon cycle, I think that's important. That captures the feel of Tartarus, how overwhelming and hostile that it's supposed to feel like. And I think in terms of visual design, they're really nailing that. Now, I need to see how it actually feels mechanically, and maybe they have a unique twist on this idea that I just haven't thought of yet. It's all about waiting to see, and going in with an open mind, in my opinion. But I think in a lot of ways, I'm super excited for Reload. It looks like all the ideas and issues that I had with P3 up to this point in time are simply being addressed or fixed or changed going into Reload. And while there are absolutely some massive critiques you can levy at the game right now for not having FemC and for not having the answer, and even if you are like me and you don't particularly care about those pillars of content, they are still pillars of content that were synonymous with the P3 experience. And they're not going to be in Reload. So is it fair to call P3 Reload the definitive edition of P3? That's hard to say. And it kind of depends upon what you like. I would argue that I may call it the definitive edition for shorthand, but in the true sense of the word, I think it would need the answer and FemC, so that it has all aspects of P3 bundled up into this modernization and modern design. And maybe they come as DLC later on, and we can discuss the price point later on, depending upon what they actually do with these pieces of content. If they even bring them to the table to begin with. We'll have to wait and see. But right now, I'm super excited for Reload. But I also don't think that it'll be a game without controversy for all the things that I've stated in this video. There's going to be people that are ticked off because it doesn't have the answer, or it doesn't have FemC, or because they changed some kind of gameplay core philosophy from either Fez or Portable going into Reload. When it comes to these remakes, you're not going to be able to please everyone. Because remember one of the major critiques that was levied at Reload when it was first announced? You just came out with ports of P3 Portable. What's the point of playing that or this? Well, if they play fundamentally the same, yeah, I can understand that. But if they're actually completely different experiences, then I think for me at least, I can justify it. We gotta wait and see. It's interesting to think and to see where this game can go from here. I'm super excited for it, but I can also be realistic about it and be honest about it. And I think that's one of the major things that internet discourse is seemingly trying to push aside in a lot of ways, is you can be excited for something but admit when it has faults, or admits that it could be better, or that it's just kind of a crappy situation on the whole. Nuance is a thing that exists, and it shouldn't be shunned or ignored. Critique of a game, even if you love the game, is not critique of you as a person, or of your character, or of your beliefs, or of your intelligence. But if you blindly follow a game and blindly follow it despite very obvious criticism, then I think that is something to look inside yourself and address. Nobody's perfect. Hell, I'm not. But I think it bears repeating and reminding every now and then. And for a game that has as core of a fan base as Persona does, and I'm part of that fandom, or at least I'm a massive fan of Persona, it's important to remind ourselves, especially going into a big release, that we can be excited about it. We're gonna look forward to it, like I am, but also be honest about it. And to be able to take the good with the bad. And to say, yeah, the bad should be shored up, and the good doesn't necessarily excuse the bad, but the good is still there. But the bad is also still there. And it's okay to admit that both are there. So I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day. Go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Let me know what social link you're most excited for in P3 Reload. For me, it has to be like the Sun. Yeah, the Sun Arcana, because he's my favorite, let's be honest. Imagine they give you a book at the end of that social link, and you can read it at any time in your room. Imagine. That's gonna break some people, and by people I mean me. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.